welcome everyone. Kenneth Lang with Leanne Calderwood, Networking for Introverts. And I'm looking forward to a conversation with a fellow introvert so much. I didn't know at the time when we had this conversation, this was actually a national week. But what I find most challenging about being an introvert is the perceptions that people have of us. I know we talked about the whole idea about the different characteristics that you have, which is maybe different than temperament. I mean, I think I label myself an introvert, but there's different ways to actually consider yourself that, right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the word introvert, I think people feel that they have to choose a side.
Hmm.
And the irony with being an introvert or an extrovert is the side's already chosen for you. And it's not something that you can kind of work out as you get older. So, I think people mistake introversion and extroversion as being a personality characteristic. But it's really a temperament. And that's something that you and I talked about in the pre-show, Kenneth, is it's really a temperament that we're born with. And it's something that will end up, dying with in the end, but it's not something that we can change in our lives. Whereas characteristics are things that we can change and we have some control over getting better at or improving throughout our lifetime. So yeah, I'm excited to dive into the conversation today about temperament and characteristics, the differences between the two, and of course, what does that mean for us who do have the introverted temperament, which I know you and I are,
Yeah.
Kenneth.
I know one of the things which happens, and it's true every week after I do a LinkedIn Live, I will leave, I will decompress, I will just kind of close my eyes and just exhale because it takes a lot for me to actually get on here and do this and have the conversation. It isn't as seamless as it seems, and I know a lot of us probably can relate to that. But there's a preparation to it, and there's a what if it doesn't work, and then it's all that stuff, and I'm sure you can relate to that as well.
Yeah. Oh, I can. And I think that's where you are a definitive introvert, Kenneth, because our temperament is we can go through these bouts of interaction with one another, interaction with people. But at the end of the day, quite literally and figuratively, we do need time with ourselves. And we do need that, they call it our quiet time, but for some people, it could be even just sitting in a noisy coffee shop by ourselves without the influence of other people picking our brains. Whereas extroverts can come out of these intense people networking receptions and crave more of it. And in fact, they're the ones that may go to their room at the end of a networking event and feel like they haven't had enough. They need more people. They're calling their spouse like the second they get into their hotel room door, because that's where they get their energy from. They recharge their battery with people. And you and I, we recharge our batteries with alone time, with just being with ourselves. And I think that's the biggest difference. And I think that's what shocks a lot of people who think they are extroverts, right? So they say, oh, I'm social and I'm outgoing and I can
Mhm.
make conversation. Well, guess what? So can I. But at the end of the day, I still need to recharge by myself. And so I've found the more people I talk to about what true introversion and extroversion temperaments are, the more former extroverts are actually saying, you know what? Actually, I think I am an introvert, because yeah, I can have a conversation with people, but at the end of the day, I need to get the heck out of there and I got to be alone by myself for just a few hours. So I think this chat here today, Kenneth, as well as other educational pieces that are hopefully coming out of International Introvert Week, will have people kind of looking at the temperaments a bit differently, and take the labeling away from it and really identifying it as, where do you find your source of recharging? Where do you refill
Mhm.
your energy bucket? So that's the conversation that I want to dive into today.
I know I can see myself at times as an extrovert when I'm with my family because
Mm.
I can carry on my conversations. I know exactly what I'm getting into. I know how to gauge things. But when it's over, or even sometimes during, I need to just take a deep breath. And I've even had to say sometimes to my family now that I'm going upstairs to rest. I'm not sick. I'm not
Yeah.
I'm not angry. I just can't keep up. And that's the perception. I mean, we just because we don't say anything or don't do anything doesn't mean we're bad or anything. We just need to recharge.
And so there's a couple things I want to tackle with this,
Mhm.
Kenneth. One is you are alluding to an example that someone even put in your LinkedIn post today about how when we show up and we're quiet, people think we're standoffish or rude or snobbish. And we're not. We're not those things. What we are is we're absorbing the conversation. We're giving ourselves some time to respond thoughtfully. And sometimes we need that time to kind of process the information. So that's you going upstairs to take that rest. I've done that at events plenty. But you when you were talking about your family members, and this is what a lot of us fall into, this trap, is we feel like, oh, today I'm feeling extroverted, or in this moment I'm feeling extroverted, and today I'm feeling introverted. But that's where the conversation or the language needs to change, because Kenneth, you are an introvert. Sadly, you will never be extroverted. You can be outgoing, you can have great energy, you can be talkative, you can be energized, you can be confident, you can be all of those words, because those are all personality characteristics and they can change day to day or year to year. But you'll always be an introvert, and you will sadly never be an extrovert. And we need to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think people look at, well, if I can't be an introvert or an extrovert, then I'm dealing with this deficiency. And it's like, no. We have different strengths. We have different things that we bring to the table. But I can't walk into a conversation and pretend to be extroverted. I'm an introvert that has confidence. I'm an introvert who has good communication skills. And I'm an introvert who isn't shy, but I'm still an introvert. And I think that's where the language needs to change. And so National or International Introvert Week could be a great time for us to change that language and that conversation.
You bring up a good point, because a lot of my local networking contacts look at me and say, Ken, you're no longer an introvert, you're an extrovert. And I have a very hard time convincing them that I'm still that way. I know you guys really well. We can have conversations, we can do things, but there will come a point when I may just zone out or just have to decompress. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
From a networking standpoint too, I'm totally okay with it. I may go to an event, may find 2 or 3 people, and I may just kind of, that's it for me, because I just can't keep it up for a while. So I think recognizing and acknowledging that is such an important part of it.
Yeah, I agree. And you already brought up some really great tips for introverts. Keeping our circles small allows us to have conversation. Because if we're in a circle with a large amount of people, introverts tend to take a step back and listen to the conversation and see what's evolving. And so I find I'm very, very talkative if the circle is up to 3 people, so 4 max. But I don't know if you guys did this in New York during the pandemic, but we had social bubbles here in BC, which means you could have up to 8 people that you could see, but that's it. Like you could only see those 8 people. Well, it was 4 couples, right? So me, my husband, and 3 other couples. That was our 8. That was our COVID bubble. But when we got together as 8 people, I was very quiet. And to your point, everyone's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm having a great time, actually. Thank you.
No.
Like, I love it. Like, I'm so glad that we're together." But when you're in a bubble of 8 people and even just 3 or 4 of those people are extroverts, well, forget it. Like, there's no way introverts are going to be able to get into the conversation the way that they think we should be engaging. But we're engaging nonetheless, right? We're just engaging differently. Doesn't make it right or wrong. We're just engaging differently. So.
And I see, I mean, I don't know how many introverts are actually in the chat here. They're just not sure yet if they want to participate. I see Brenda Miller just joined us from Detroit.
Oh, she's an introvert. Yeah.
She is a total introvert.
Total introvert, Brenda. Own it. Yeah. The irony, Kenneth, the irony is the people who will listen to this conversation today will be introverts. And I have found that because I'm doing some education now in my industry about introversion and extroversion. And a majority of the people in my education sessions are introverts. So we're not going to see a lot of extroverts today. And if you are an extrovert, you need to start jumping in the chat, because that would be a very extroverted thing to do, is to jump in the chat and let us know that you're an extrovert. And by the way, we love our extroverted friends, right? Like, there are people, most of my friends are extroverts, that understand that I need some quiet time at events. So anyways, Brenda, hello, welcome, love you, great to see you.
I know that one of the first times that I actually, we have our Donna Hook, a total introvert. She's from my neck of the woods here.
Hey, Donna.
I have Hanan Isaacs, recovering extrovert.
Aha! See, they had that light bulb moment. Maybe that happened today. Hanan, you'll have to let us know when you had that.
And Lisa, go ahead.
Well, Lisa, I want to tackle that word hybrid, because a lot of people think it's a spectrum, right? But here's the thing: is the spectrum definitely has a middle line when it comes to introversion, extroversion. So for example, if you are on the left hand of the spectrum, which actually looks like you're right when I'm looking at the screen, if you're on the left, you're an introvert. If you're on the right, you're an extrovert. Now, you could be somewhere near the middle, but we can't start calling ourselves omnivert or ambivert. Those are two words that get thrown around a lot, especially in my industry. By the way, I'm in the meetings and events industry, so I literally network for a living as an introvert. And so people throw around those hybrid words, but at the end of the day, was it Lisa, I think, who made that comment? At the end of the day, Lisa, you really need to decide, can I go another 6 hours of talking with people, or do I need to decompress on my own in my hotel room or in my bedroom or whatever that is? Because that will be what decides if you're an introvert or an extrovert. And remember, this is a temperament. This isn't something that you can change over the course of your life. You can become more outgoing. You can become more confident. You can get communication skills that may create this illusion of hybridness and omnivert and ambivertness, but it's about your energy levels, right? It's about where you recharge and show up as your best. Kenneth and I, after this call, hopefully Kenneth and I have not scheduled another call.
No.
Because we need, exactly. Amen, brother, right? Like, you and I need to go get another tea. I need to go just sit in my kitchen, which right now is super quiet because my husband's out of town, and I just need 5 minutes. That's all I need. I don't need like half a day. I just need 5 minutes of no people. And so, Lisa, I need you to challenge yourself. Okay, after a networking interaction, do you need more? Do you need more? Do you need more? The other word, Kenneth, if you don't mind me saying, and this is for the extroverts or those who kind of feel on that spectrum or kind of feel like they're in the middle there, because the word lonely comes up a lot. Introverts don't get lonely. Extroverts can get lonely because they derive their energy from people. And it doesn't mean that I have never felt lonely in my life. I don't want it to seem that way. But my house is empty this week, and it is a blessing. I am loving every minute of my husband being gone. I love my husband, but I'm loving this time where I don't have to cook for my family and clean for my family. And I do not have friends coming over because I'm an introvert, and this is my dream vacation right here in my house this week. Extroverts will get lonely. If I was an extrovert, this would be a very painful week for me because there would be no one around, no one to talk to, and I would be entertaining every night to get people in the door. I'm going to turn it over to you, Kenneth. I feel like I'm talking too much. See, introverts can talk, right?
Yeah, we can. I think one of the things I just picked up, which I hadn't done in a very long time, is I started reading again. I used to love to read when I was growing up. Very quiet. I started to try to use a Kindle, which wasn't really my thing. So now I've gotten back to reading a book, and there's nothing better than being in bed reading. And I'm not talking about reading about LinkedIn, and I'm not talking about reading about networking, and I'm not talking about reading about looking for a job. It's just reading.
Yeah. Yeah. And reading is a great way for us to recharge our batteries. but it's not the only way, right? Like it's going for a walk. It's, listening to music. It's not sleeping. I think people confuse sleep with being the opportunity for introverts to recharge. And that isn't the case. Sleep is not where we recharge. It's where we are consciously recharging our batteries and feeding ourselves for the next interaction. Kenneth, I don't know how much you want me jumping into the comments.
Oh, you
but
can definitely do it. I mean, like I said, I'm just kind of, if you want me to join, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, well, because I noticed Sandra, she was Sandra, I hope you're okay if I mention your comment, because you identify, you feel introvert, and then maybe in the pandemic, or an extrovert, you felt pandemic, it made you introverted. I think, Sandra, like I said, these hard and fast rules of our day-to-day interactions, we can't waffle between the two, between being an extrovert and an extrovert. It sounds like you are an extrovert, but sometimes you just need some alone time. That is okay. Like extroverts can have alone time. This isn't about like if you have alone time, you are an introvert and never an extrovert. But it is like that majority rule, right? If a majority of the time you need to be around people to energize, then you are an extrovert. If a majority of the time you are getting exhausted being around people and you need some time afterwards to decompress, you're an introvert. And it's a temperament that goes with you throughout life. And I know Douglas in the comments said that it depends on situations.
Right.
Your characteristics flex based on the situation, right? So you can be more outgoing. You can be more talkative, like I am right now, right? I am being more talkative, but I am not an extrovert. I am an introvert. At the end of this conversation, I will not talk to anyone for 3 hours. So yes, our audience does help us bring some personality characteristics to the surface. But at the end of that interaction, it's where we recharge our batteries. So I hope that helps. And if I'm not being clear, I almost need Brenda Miller to throw a keyword in the chat like pomegranate. That's the keyword, Brenda, to say this isn't making any sense at all. But it really is a temperament. And I think that's where we need to move the conversation, is away from personality characteristic into temperament.
I think with me, I didn't realize that I was an introvert versus an extrovert. I just thought this was who I was, not good or bad. And as I started talking to other people and going to events, I realized that it wasn't me, but how could I network with other people who just would not stop talking, would not stop anything. And I was like, or even worse than that, when we were on a Zoom call, they'd be running around and walking around and here and there and up and down. I'm like, slow down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's now that we've returned to in-person events, and Kenneth, you and I talked about this in the pre-show. It's a fascinating kind of rediscovery of who it is we really are. And introverts tend to be more shy, but introverts can thrive in networking situations, especially if the event host makes allowances for introverts to thrive. To your point, Kenneth, going into a networking event and everyone's talking a mile a minute, people like you and me tend to take a step back, and we tend to kind of watch it unfold, and we tend to listen more than talk. And that plays well to our advantage. And this goes to one of the comments someone else made earlier about, some of the world's leaders and CEOs being introverts. Well, it's because they actually listened. And they weren't always, talking and influencing and doing, and they actually listened and then were able to act. But events that allow for people, regardless of their temperament, to fill their buckets are going to have more successful interactions and learning at those events. So we're seeing a lot of conversation right now around neurodiversity, right? That's definitely a hot trending topic, especially in my world. So I'm in the meetings and events space, and making accommodations for neurodivergent personalities is really top of mind for us right now. And you start to look at, okay, what are these accommodations that people are making? And Kenneth, it was funny because one of the accommodations, which is so awesome, is some event hosts are creating a quiet room, kind of like a meditation
Right.
space. And so they create this meditation space. And the first thing I'm thinking is, well, I want to go to that room. Like, I'm an introvert. I want to go to that room. And so, and I don't want to take anything away from those who identify as having a neurodivergent personality. But I think introverts might be in that same boat. We learn differently. We energize differently. And events that make accommodations for us to learn in the way that we know how are going to have more successful events. We're going to have more successful events and better outcomes. So it's a fascinating conversation now that neurodiversity is top of mind, because making accommodations for introverts can be so simple to do and really easy to create in your in-person events.
I know one of the things I did when I first went to in-person events and when I started to recognize who I was is I brought along a friend, someone who I could have a conversation with. So when a third person came in, or a fourth person, which was invariably going to happen, I wasn't like totally thrown off. And this other, and you know, I tell the story. One of the people I brought with me was as extroverted as they come. And it was such a great thing because we're best friends. We're still best friends to this day. And he's actually in a similar business to me. And we would just be chatting like we were just chatting as two friends. So it was so much easier for me to actually do that, to have someone there and we could share that. And then it became easier for me to speak. And then the ironic thing is the extrovert, all of a sudden, my friend was like quiet. Didn't really know how to react at first because he hadn't been to networking events. He didn't know anyone and he wasn't really sure where to go. So I thought that was very interesting.
Well, and again, that's, people make these assumptions about how an introvert should be. We also make the same assumptions about extroverts, right? We assume an extrovert's just going to walk in a room like, a circus performer and just command attention. Well, no, it just means that they like being in the room and they get energy from the people in the room. But to expect them to be, conversationalists, et cetera, especially in a room when they don't know anybody, that's putting unrealistic expectations on your extroverted friend.
Right.
So it's interesting that you finally, kind of saw that as he came into the room. But, introverts, that's one of the tips that you said. It's one of my favorite tips that I give to people in the meetings and events industry is, yes, you're going to a networking event to meet new people. But introverts, if you can saddle up next to a friend of yours, that makes kind of heading into the room and breaking the ice just a little bit easier. And if I can throw this kind of grenade into the mix, introverts that create a personal brand will have more success in a networking room. And that was my strategy. And so that's what I've been able to do rather successfully is when I started in this industry, my industry, 20 years ago, as an introvert, super uncomfortable. But it was around about 16 years ago that I decided to create a brand. And now when I head into a networking room, there's a lot of people who recognize me or know me. And that's the icebreaker. And so as an introvert now, I don't have to create conversation. People are coming up to me to say a lot of times, hey, I read your content on LinkedIn or whatever that is right now. But so that's been a really great strategy for me as an introvert is I no longer have to be super awesome at all of the great ice-breaking networking questions because people are approaching me because of the brand that I've created. So
see, this is an interesting comment. And it's true. When introverts go to people, they have to be mindful of the fact that they still have to network.
Amen. Amen, Osnat. And you're right. And it's absolutely true. So that's where introverts need to own their time in the room, right? They get into the room, kind of get a feel for the space. Osnat, I don't know if you do this, but I actually have a networking hot list. So I'll research who's going to be in the room before I go into the room. And then I'll be very intentional about ensuring that I meet those people on my hot list because number one, it gets me away from my partner who I'll call her out. Her name is Doris. She's like extroverted to the core. It gets me Doris will get me in the room and then I'm on my own and I can find these hot list of people. So, so Osnat, I couldn't agree more 100%. We need additional strategies so that we don't leave the room empty-handed. And by empty-handed, I mean, we did not accomplish the outcome that we set when we went into the networking room in the first place, which is to meet new people usually.
And Meryl says, as we become quite comfortable and not put ourselves out to introduce ourselves to new people. Yeah. I mean, I feel like a lot of the people on these calls have become my digital family, if you will, because we've developed a relationship. So I have a certain comfort level. But at the same time, I recognize the fact that there are limits. And I think we all have different personalities. We all are at different parts of the introvert spectrum, if you will. It's not just a one size fits all thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, you know, again, for me, it's crystal clear that it's where I get my energy from. But for a lot of people who, you know, grew up thinking that this is a characteristic that they can change, it's a new way of looking at it. So I get we're not going to completely change how people view introversion, extroversion on this 1 hour call today. But it does give rise to asking questions about it. And, you know, one of the more famous publications about introversion, the book called Quiet by Susan Cain, clearly defines introversion, extroversion as, you know, this where we fill our bucket and being a temperament. But there's a ton of other books out there, right? In fact, I just finished reading a book about introverts in sales, which was fascinating because, I mean, number one, we're all in sales. But number two, as someone who identifies as being a salesperson and an introvert, I found this book fascinating. So I finished Matthew Pollard's 2 books, one on sales and ironically one on networking. And there's so many good introverted resources out there. In fact, Kenneth, I have to confess, before I came on the call, I looked at how many groups were on LinkedIn about introverts. And spoiler alert, there's about 6 or 7 groups on LinkedIn that have a robust membership of, you know, like more than 100 people. But guess how many there are for extroverts?
Thousands? Hundreds?
0.
Well, 0, really?
0. There are 0 extroverts. Ironically, this is the ironic thing. Introverts like to have conversation about being introverted. Extroverts don't. So there are no groups on LinkedIn, robust groups. And if you find one, please send it to me. But there's no real robust groups for extroverts on LinkedIn because the conversation is more about accommodation for introverts. So anyways, I'll leave you with that.
Right.
You know,
I think one of the challenges I had on LinkedIn was actually starting to engage with people as part of networking. And what I did, the first thing I started to do was I started to comment on other people's content because I was kind of so scared about posting something. The mindset of what's going to happen, is it right, all that. And I think I don't know if that's an insecurity again, or being introverted, or how that actually works. But I know a lot of people I know are so afraid of taking that first step. And I know we talked about imposter syndrome and all those other things too.
Yeah, you know, that would be a fascinating study, and maybe people can jump in the comments on this one, because I think extroverts can also suffer from imposter syndrome, which is kind of what you were going through, Kenneth. I know I have. So yes, you and I are both introverts, and you and I both suffer from IP. But I think extroverts suffer from it just as much. The great thing about LinkedIn, and again, this is about introverts, is it is that gateway drug to networking, where we can take the time we need to formulate an educated response. And so introverts thrive on social media because we get that extra few seconds or few minutes to really communicate what it is that we want to say. Whereas sometimes when we go into a networking room, we trip on our words. And I don't know about you, Kenneth, but when I started to kind of trip on my words, or I was finding it really hard to even find my words as a young professional, I thought something was wrong with me. And then, of course, I learned, oh, no, it's just I'm processing information differently. I'm going to be okay. But when I got into the networking world and the professional world, and I couldn't talk intelligently, and I'm an intelligent person, I'm like, what is wrong with me? What is this disconnect between my head knowledge and me being able to communicate that? So, and that's where I learned more about introversion. And that was probably what was going on, is I just needed that extra second. Oh, you just posted the,
Well,
what's
but
the
again, we speak about imposter syndrome, the two of us. I think it might be helpful to kind of explain what that means to other
Yeah.
people.
Good call. So, Nicole, imposter syndrome is where one doesn't feel that they're smart enough, good enough, smart enough to do what it is what they're doing. Any professional that maybe gets a promotion and they're like, holy shit, I just pulled the wool over their eyes. That's imposter syndrome. Or we're afraid to post our thought leadership because we don't feel like we're smart enough or the smartest person in the world form or another. And for some of us, we suffer from it a lot of the times. But again, breaking yourself out of imposter syndrome is you are good enough, you are smart enough.
Right.
Get your thought leadership out there. Take that promotion because you earned it, and know that that's your right.
I mean, you bring up a good point from before. If someone asks me when I'm doing a presentation, I'm doing an event for a blurb, I can sit down and write a marketing blurb. I can sit down and do my introduction. But when I have to sit and do an elevator pitch or whatever we're going to call it, and I have to go in front of a room, I know about me. I know what I can say, but something inside triggers like, should I say this? Should I say that? Is this good? Is that good? So I become my own worst enemy. And I don't know if that was exactly what you're alluding to, but I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing. And now we're looking at two things. Is that part of your introversion coming out, or is it IP coming out? And this is again where, we need to ask ourselves, Kenneth, well, do we even need to label it? Right? Like, do we even need to know why this is happening? Instead, can we find solutions and workarounds so that, number one, we are confident in our skills and abilities, and all of us on this video right now should be confident in their skills and abilities, but I get it if you have days where you don't feel it. But how do we get to a place where we're consistently feeling like, yeah, I know my stuff. I know I belong. I am a smart person and I'm good enough for these opportunities. And number two, for introverts, what do we need to do to get over those tongue tripping episodes, right? Like, do we need to attend a Toastmasters, or do we need to just practice more on live video, like this opportunity that you've given me here today, Kenneth? And because those things, again, that doesn't change the fact that I'm an introvert, but it does change the personality characteristic that I'm not a good communicator, pardon me, or at least I used to not be a good communicator. So I can be a better communicator. I can't be less introverted, but I can become a better communicator.
I think one of the challenges that I was probably, as an introvert, even during the pandemic, I didn't mind it so much for a while. And I was almost ashamed to say that, to be honest. Because it's like, I shouldn't be enjoying this. Now, I didn't enjoy what we were going through, but the quiet and the ability to do stuff was hard to it's hard to put into words. I mean, I dread having stuff to do all the time. I dread knowing I have to be at point A, point B, point C, point D. Sometimes I just want to do nothing.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we have to. That's how we recharge. And, and I've heard a lot of those stories, Kenneth, about the last 3 years and how introverts thrived. But I've heard this heartbreaking stories of the extroverts that didn't thrive. Right. And that's where I have a lot of compassion. I can't be empathetic because I don't know what that's like to be miserable and alone, right? But I can have compassion for people that needed human connection and they didn't get it for extended periods of time. So, my heart goes out to our extroverted friends because the last 3 years have not been easy. And, thankfully we're now back in person and hopefully those extroverts are able to fill their buckets.
I know one thing we were talking about as well was as people go back to in-person events, it seems like in some cases, either less people are going there or the people that are going there are more engaged. It used to be
Mm,
that there were more people there. From an introverted standpoint, I like that. I like
yeah.
that there aren't as many people there.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the end is coming, Kenneth, because they're all going to come back. But like I said, I'm in the industry of people coming together and meetings and events. And what we've noticed is a lot more intention and a lot more gratitude. Because I think a lot of us in our industry took it for granted that we would see each other a lot. Now we don't take it for granted nearly as much. And even now, so we've been back, especially in Canada, we've been back meeting for a full calendar year. In fact, it was a year ago this week that we had our first really big in-person event, hundreds of people crammed into a bar, no masks, blah, blah, blah. But even now, a year later, I'm still hearing at events, it's so good to be back. It's so good to be back. It's so good to be back. And that's a whole year we've been saying that. So I think there'll come a day when we stop saying it's so good to be back. And that might be, it's like, oh, well, I hope we learn something though from not being able to be together, and we don't take for granted these opportunities to get together.
I think for me, one of the biggest things I've learned is how to really communicate with all different types of people, whether they're introverts or extroverts or some part of it, because I was in my comfort zone and my safety zone, and LinkedIn has kind of allowed me as a first step to get involved, because I can think about what I'm going to post. I can think about how I'm going to post. I can get my thoughts together, and no one is actually like in the back saying, "Ken, you better do this now," or "Ken, like, what's going on?" I mean, I think that makes a big difference from an introverted standpoint. Just start posting, start engaging that way.
Amen. Amen. And that's, whether it's the written word, and the thing that was introduced to us during the pandemic was audio, right? So the pressure's off to be on camera if you're not comfortable with camera. Once again, introverts are not afraid of cameras, but if you are afraid of the camera, audio gave you that opportunity to practice, if nothing else, to practice being an effective communicator. So, that's the one blessing I liked about LinkedIn audio, is it gave me the opportunity to communicate with people in a different way, right? Very few of us did that prior to the pandemic. And it allowed introverts opportunities to contribute to the conversation when the stage was small enough. But I need to ask the introverts in the room who might be Clubhouse or green room users, when the stage was large, the introverts did not pipe up. I didn't.
No, I sure did.
I would love other introverts to kind of offer their stories, but unless you had a really good moderator in that Clubhouse room, the introverts, if the stage got too large, we were reduced to nothing again. So, anyways.
But that's what I did learn from that experience, is how to be in a place with lots of other people. I think the most amount of people we had on one of these calls was like 70 or 75 people. And that was a challenge for me the first time, because I also know what it's like to be in the audience, and you want to say something and you want to engage. And at the same time, you're not sure if you should engage. I can't tell you how many times I was in events and I'm like, should I raise my hand? Should I say something? What happens if I say something that's not right? Am I going to go shrivel up and go into bed? That sort of thing. And I think
that's your IP coming out again, though, right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's totally your IP coming out.
Okay.
So yeah, we need to just practice, Kenneth. And listen, you've done this show, consistently for what, 2.5 years, 3 years, every single
it'll
week?
be 3 years in June, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you don't need more practice, but this is a great place for people to practice, is on these live shows, because there's no judgment. I mean, everything I say could be complete BS, and that's okay. We all have differing opinions, and different is different. It doesn't make it good or bad. It's just different. So yeah, that's your IP coming out, Kenneth. I hope you know that. So
I do.
Good.
So I want to thank you very much, Leanne, for the conversation today. And I'm hoping we can continue the conversation afterwards here in the event. And I branded myself a LinkedIn introvert because I was, and still am. And I'm a proud introvert. I did it. My thing today, and the analogy is, I don't know if you ever saw Revenge of the Nerds, that whole movie.
Decades, but yes.
And I looked at myself as the nerd, and it's true. I was that. I mean, back then it was a nerd or a geek, and maybe that's not what an introvert is now. But I was in that class, and so I think it's important to call yourself out as to who you are.
And again, it's about the energy, right? Yeah. It's never about being a nerd or being the most popular person in school. It's about, what does that popular person do at the end of the day? Do they need to be around more people, or can they be alone for a few hours and find complete contentment in that?
I think that's one of the reasons why I started creating these events. Like I'm able to create events and organize and do all that stuff. But if I have to be the one that's going to be speaking for an hour or hour and a half at a session with 300 people, I might not feel the same comfort level, although I'm trying to now. That's going to be my next thing.
Love it.
Yeah,
Love it.
I got to try. I mean, the other thing on my to-do list is to do some more karaoke. I did it one time.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I did it.
That scares the heck out of me.
I did that one time. I don't know why I did it. The worst part was it was videotaped. But you know what? When it was over, I felt, oh my God, this is so much fun.
Yeah. It's, oh, well, you can have all of my spots. I can't do karaoke. Especially not today. Oh my gosh, I lost my voice. See, introverts like to talk. I lost my voice last week because I was talking so much.
Well,
okay.
Thanks a lot. I know it's morning there, so have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
And we will talk or chat or post or do something really soon.
I'd love that. Yeah, let's continue the conversation, Kenneth, because I think it's an important one to have.
Definitely. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.